Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the workshop, and today, I guess this is a surprise, the Bearcat is finished. And along with that, I made some mistakes and didn't cover things in a previous video or two, and since this was such a quick build, I'm going to try to go over those today, and I'll try to be as succinct as I possibly can. Let's get into it. So I'll start off with the fuselage just to get things going. The fuselage was completely fiberglassed using sanding sealer. I used 2 additional coats after the application to thicken that, as well as sand it back to try to make things smooth. This helps to fill in the grain of the balsa wood. But I did start with a base of sanding sealer before I put on the fiberglass, because the wood was so dried out that if I didn't do that, I would likely see additional warping. And with that sort of situation, you want to try to address that initially. So if there is warping in the wood from it being wet again, you want to be able to sand that out. So I took care of that and then went ahead and started glassing everything. The main thing that I want to address up front is the cowl. If you notice, the cowl has a very nice taper from the side profile. If you look at the front profile, it doesn't have that taper. That's because this is the exact same cowl that was used by Top Flight for the Corsair. The Bearcat has this very pronounced taper that I actually had to cut a 1/2-inch gap at the leading edge of the cowl and a triangle all the way back to the trailing edge. And then I had to glue that together, and then I used epoxy and fiberglass on the inside of the cowl to strengthen that seam. As I continued to work with the cowl was so incredibly brittle from sun exposure or age or whatever that I decided to go ahead and do a heavy glassing of the cowl. I knew that this was going to add a lot of weight up front, but it was worth it in terms of longevity. You cannot get these cowls anymore. You just can't. So I figured that if I did have some sort of incident, I'd rather not have to piece together this plastic cowl. So I went ahead and glassed it with epoxy, and it's all good to go now. It did have a lot of rough spots. I went to sand it. I had to use a power sander, and there were quite a few pinholes. I used Bondo spot putty. It's the red stuff that comes in a little metal tube. You can get it at the automotive store. And that stuff dries really, really quick, very sandable. And right after that, I used primer. I noticed some additional rough spots that I continued to power sand, did additional primer, and I was pretty satisfied with the shape overall. Now let me back up a second. With the cowl having that pie cut in the taper, the opening in the front of the cowl was no longer round, and that really bugged me. So I used Bondo just to round out the cowl a little bit along these sides and add a little bit of meat there. So that was an additional step too. Moving on from there, so all of the linkages were already established in this airplane when I got it. I just had to install servos for the elevator and the rudder. The tail wheel and steering mechanism were already installed, so nothing to worry about there. Obviously, I have made a hatch. The hatch was just cut with a razor saw and put a couple pieces of cardboard trace cutouts to make little formers for it. Not really a big deal there. I am using a Great Plains medium-sized brushless motor mount. You can get that from Tower. For my motor, had to use a couple of washers to sort of cinch it down since it is slightly undersized for this motor. But nothing really of major consequence. I'm really happy with how it worked out because I wanted to save weight with the smaller mount, but also I didn't want to have to cut the mount because I only needed to go like 2 inches. So if I used a larger mount, I would have likely had to cut some metal, and I didn't want to really do that. It works for this purpose, and I'm very, very happy with the fit and finish overall. Again, the prop I'm using is a prop from FMS. It's a 14 by 12? No, I can't remember. It's an FMS prop. I remember I did do some bench testing on actually this motor, the prototype motor for the Flight Test Monster radial, and it was well within the amp specifications that I was getting from Josh Bixler. Seemed to perform just fine, so that's why I decided to go with the Flight Test Monster radial. So from there, I mean, a lot of this work was already done. So obviously primer, after the sand down, after the sanding sealer, and then 2 coats of this wonderful blue that just comes from a rattle can. Nothing too fancy here. I wanted to use spray paint just because it's quick, it's easy. I'm not going for a high amount of detail here. So there's no panel lines, there's no rivets, none of that. This is purely just for throwing around, bashing around. I don't like to badmouth other modelers, but suffice to say, this model was not originally built the way I would have built it. I'm very meticulous, I'm very picky, and there are just things about how this airplane was built that I thought, this is not going to be an all-out build for me. I'm not going to try to make all the repairs that are necessary because it's more work than the model is worth. So I'm making it flyable, and that's it. The last thing about the fuselage, and then I'll move on to the wing. I did modify the fuselage. You can see these exhaust outlets here. Those were simply relief cuts into the skin, and I put some balsa inserts to create the form, and I just sort of guessed. Ideally, these should have been a little bit lower, but there is a main stringer for the fuselage that runs just below this, and I didn't want to cut into that because that adds a lot of torsional rigidity to the airframe. Didn't want to cut that. So I made a little scale sacrifice there. I think it's good enough, and I think you can see that overall theme of this model. So let me get the wing, and then we'll start talking about that. All right, so here we have the wing for the Bearcat. Again, same finishing technique. Finishing fiberglass cloth with sanding sealer, same surface preparation, 2 coats of sanding sealer over top of the initial application. So the landing gear, these are the biggest retracts I could find at Hobby King that had metal trunnions. Reason being is I just don't seem to have good luck with retracts unless you go really high dollar. They either rip out or they bend. So since I'm not investing a whole lot into this model, I just decided to go big. These are probably way oversized, and I'm okay with that. They protrude a little bit from the wing. Again, I'm okay with that. I did have to cut little pockets for the retracts to fit in, and then remove part of the skin to well, I mean, there was skin damage anyway, but I had to remove the permanent fixed gear mounts, and that way make room for the retracts. Along with that, in order to do these cutouts, I had to reskin parts of the bottom of the wing as well. Again, minor. I had lots of scrap in my scrap box, so that wasn't a big deal. Cut holes for the flap servos and installed those. That was pretty straightforward and easy. Looking at these offset hinges for the flaps, I'll give you one guess as to where they're from. Believe it or not, these are from a Fly Zone de Havilland Beaver. These hinges just seem to do the job perfectly. Again, I'm only going to be using them for lower speed flight, for landing and such, so they should be just fine. Obviously, after I do a flight or 3, I'll do a full inspection and make sure everything is up to par. If not, I can get different hinges. That's not a problem. The control surfaces, again, I built these because the airplane did not come with them. So the ailerons and flaps are built from scratch. The rudder and elevators are also built from scratch, but that was more or less to address the construction issues. They weren't constructed properly and they were the improper shape. So these were constructed per the plans and they were covered in Oratex. And the Oratex took the paint just fine, didn't need to use any primer at all. So it maintains a little bit of that fabric-y finish. It's really kind of nice. The belt crank setup for the ailerons worked just fine. And the flaps are operating just fine. The gear covers. Since I deviated from what scale, these wheels should ideally be more set into the belly pan. Didn't want to have to deal with that, so I just shifted everything out. Gives it a wider track and more stable anyway. But I did opt to do these gear covers just to clean things up a little bit in the air. And that's just plywood. And I've got a couple of 3D printed mounts on the back side so that it holds everything in. It's just a pressure fit, but it's held on really, really strongly by these 4 screws. Graphics are from Cali. They're just vinyl graphics, simple graphics package, readily available. And, you know, they went on really easily, and I did not do a clear coat over top of them. Mostly because, again, I don't care. Quick and dirty is the name of this. If this model gets beat up, I don't care. I'm going to enjoy this model. I have so many really nice models that, you know, I don't mind flying them, but I just don't have as much opportunity to fly them because I really do wait for really nice days to fly them. The P-47, the Corsair, shoot, I haven't even flown the Bugatti since the Flight Fest where I last flew it. Not because it won't fly, because the landing gear won't let it fly. So again, I want to fly this model. I want to fly the snot out of it. And so I've taken steps to do so and just not care as much if I lose it. The one thing that I wish, I can't find it anywhere in my shop, I don't know what I did with it, is the intake vents here. I wanted to put some screen door material here to just sort of give it a different textured look. If I ever find it, I will do that, but it doesn't matter right now. So really what I want to lastly touch upon is how this model was, it was really an exercise in getting back into the swing of things. I moved and I needed a project to fill time because I wasn't going to have enough time to do the P40 or P51, and I needed to get to know my shop. I used an ARF that a club member had, and I put that together for him in a week and a half, and that helped me learn where all the tools were. But really, I wanted to do this model because it's using a lot of the techniques that I normally use for all of the other models, and being able to figure out my workflow and my organization and cleanup and how dirty are things going to get, how much are paint fumes going to spread throughout the house. You know, I painted all of this outside, but I brought it inside to cure because it's still a bit chilly. So all of these things play together in my approach for this model. This isn't meant to be a showpiece. This is meant to be a fun piece. And I think it'll be just fine. All up weight on this airplane is, with batteries that I have, is 10.6 pounds, which is 0.6 over what Top Flight recommends. Center of gravity is a 1/4 inch forward of the foremost mark that Top Flight has marked on their plans. So she's nose heavy, she's a little overweight, but she's way overpowered. I'm guessing I'll be having close to 2,000 watts on this airplane. So lots and lots and lots of power. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. Now, I have my plans set for a maiden flight, and I think it'll be fun. Hopefully it'll go to plan, but we all know how those go. And you know, I already have the next project sitting right over there in the corner. Actually, 2 projects. So stay tuned. I know we're all trying to deal with this COVID-19 stuff, and I'm not going to say much on it. You guys know I try to keep my channel pretty clean of anything that's going on outside of the RC world. But suffice to say, I am going to be in my shop as much as I can, building flying works of art. And hopefully the next one, even though it is an ARF, will be a fun project that I can share with you. I'm going to try to document it as much as I can, maybe do some more time lapses so you guys can see the whole construction process, because it is an ARF. It's not going to take me a whole lot of time, and help me learn some new camera techniques maybe. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. But thanks so much for stopping by the workshop and we're going to make some more flying works of art.